Come on in where the table is spread and the feast of the Lord is going on. We welcome you to the First Baptist Church of Crown Heights virtual service. We offer many online services for you to experience all week long. Join us on Sunday at 9 a.m. for Sunday School led by Reverend Caton on Zoom. On Mondays to replay Sunday sermon and enjoy biblical highlights as you watch. Tune into Flashback First Baptist on Tuesday evenings at 6:30 p.m. on Facebook Live. Then on Wednesday evenings, enjoy sound biblical teachings and great discussions during our Pastor and People Bible study at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom. On Thursday, start your day off right with our morning prayer call at 7 a.m. On first Sundays, when you tune into our services, you can commune with us. Well, we have given you the menu and the spiritual table is set. All you have to do is eat up and enjoy.
You are here. You are here. Thank you for being here today. While you're here, hope you hear something that inspires you to live. You are here. You are here. Thank you for being here today. While you're here, hope you hear something that inspires you to live. Oh, something that inspires you to live. Oh, something that inspires you to live.
How long till Black Future Month? As a child of the 90s, my earliest memories of Black History Month was wearing a black turtleneck with one of those matching kente cloth kufis and sashes, singing Kumbaya in the junior intermediate choir at the Mount Carmel Baptist Church, 712-14 Quincy Street, between Stuyvesant and Malcolm X. I remember my grandmother sitting us down to watch the Black History Sunday videotape from church. They recorded the 11 o'clock service with the pastor's sermon and then the 3:30 service downstairs in the fellowship hall. I did not understand much of it at that time, but what I realized years later was that was my grandmother's way of trying to make sure that my sister and I was able to understand who we are as people of African descent. My grandmother kept stuff that she thought we would need, she said, for school. She did not have a college degree, but she was smart enough to know to subscribe to the Ebony magazine. And she treated the Ebony magazine like it was gold. She never threw out an Ebony magazine. So as children, when we had nothing else to do, we could always go over to that big pile of Ebony magazines right by the TV, because your grandmother had one too. I did you just to shout amen in the chat box. That was their way of using what they had in order to make sure that we knew who we are. It was their way of making sure that we were proud to be African people. Whether you were from Trinidad or whether you were from Jamaica, whether you were from South Carolina or Alabama, it was their way of passing down to us all that we would need to know in order to thrive in the wilderness of America. It was their way of making sure that we understood that there was more to our history than slavery and lynchings. When they put that kente cloth kufi on my head and they put that sash around your arm, it was their way of letting us know that you have a history that goes beyond the slave ship, that you are the children of Queens, Hatshepsut and Nefertiti and Makeda and Nzinga. You are the legacies of kings and warriors like Shaka Zulu and Mansa Musa. It was their way of making sure that we knew who we were. It was their way of making sure that we know who we are in order that nobody else can tell us who we are. Because if you don't know who you are, somebody else will define you. Our history bears the names of creators of civilization, men and women who were skilled in medicine, in math, in philosophy. You can never tell me that a black boy can't do math because he's black. No, because he is the son of the one who figured out how to measure the stars. She is the daughter of men and women who created civilizations long before anybody else. It was their way of making sure that we were clear about who we are. And in 1926, Carter G. Woodson introduced the idea of a Negro History Week. It was to be celebrated the second week of February. This was a way to combat what Woodson called the miseducation of the Negro. We were taught to hate ourselves, despise our skin. We were miseducated to believe we evolved from apes. But Negro History Week was a way to build self-confidence and pride about our past. And in 1976, the week was expanded into Black History Month, which we now celebrate all month long. But we all know that every month is Black History Month. We don't have to wait until February to sing Lift Every Voice and Sing. We don't have to wait until Black History Month to say Black Lives Matter. Black History Month is a lifestyle. It is a way of life. And now there are some who ask, what about Black Future Month? I know that might sound strange, but I want you to keep going with me this morning. One of my newest favorite writers is a Black woman by the name of N.K. Jemisin. And she wrote an essay titled, How Long Till Black Future Month? She writes, as I write this, it's February, Black History Month in the United States. Everyone jokes that of course Black history gets celebrated only during the shortest month of the year, but no one seems puzzled by the fact that there is no time correspondingly devoted to examining, celebrating, or imagining the Black future. No one seems puzzled by the fact that there is no time set aside to examine, to celebrate, and to imagine Black future. And while we celebrate our history, we must make sure that our celebration of the past never comes at the expense of attending to our present realities. You know, it was that old Baptist hymn that said, a charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a never dying soul to save, and to fit it for the sky, to serve this present age, my calling to fulfill, and all of my powers engaged to do my master's will. We cannot celebrate our history at the expense of being prepared to serve our present age. We must never become so fascinated by history that we forget about our future. That's what nostalgia is. People who always live in the past because they believe that our best days were yesterday, that there are no days ahead of us. We've got to constantly press forward because our best days are ahead of us. But you must never become so fascinated by yesterday. You know, every time I go into somebody's church, not this church, but I will often preach in churches, and in the fellowship hall, they always have that picture or pictures of what the church used to be back in the day when it was packed to the rafters. And they seem to think that the best days were back in the day. But faith tells us that our future is always brighter. Jeremiah said, for I know the thoughts that I think for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and to give you a future. I want to submit to you this morning. Black History Month began as a way to celebrate our achievements, as historians were unearthing our past. But I want to submit to you this morning that there is more to us than our history. No one seems puzzled, by the fact that there is no time devoted to examining, celebrating, and imagining the black future. All of these billion-dollar corporations want to talk about history without investing in our future. No black student at a university that was built with slave labor ought to have to pay tuition. Don't allow people to celebrate your history when they are actually in the place, and they ought to repent for what they did in the past in order to chart a better future. We need to start talking about our black future. Yes, talk about history, but also talk about the future. What if we talked about where we are trying to go, and who we are trying to be, instead of simply talking about what used to happen? Black History Month in a pandemic ought to feel different. It's time for us to think real hard about what it means to be black in America today. The other day, I was on a call, and it was a brother, no, it wasn't a brother, it was a white man who said, it's so sad that so many black people don't trust the vaccine. And he says, and rightfully so, he agreed that a lot of black people, I know I'm talking to some of y'all right now, who are really hesitant about the vaccine. And I really had to interject. And I said, well, sir, I want you also to know that it is not just a story about black people who don't want the vaccine. It's also the story about communities like Washington Heights, where black people and Latino people want the vaccine, but rich white people came into their neighborhoods and took all the scheduling appointments. So if we tell the story of history, we've got to tell the whole story, but we also have to make sure that we talk about our present realities so that we don't have to repeat our history. What about Black Future Month? And that's what leads us into our text of the morning. Jesus took his 3 core disciples to the top of a mountain for a leadership retreat. 2,000 miles, 2,000 feet high in the air, up and away from the demands of the sick and the hungry. They thought they had made it. This was their mama, I made it moment. They could look down and see how far they had come. And mountaintop moments, beloved, are good for us. It is good for us to have mountaintop moments that remind us that there is more to life than storms and rain. It's good for us to have mountaintop moments, to go to the graduation to see your grandbaby cross the stage. It's good for us to have mountaintop moments when we ribbon cut our own businesses and our own coffee shops and our own dumpling stands. It's good for us to have mountaintop moments. But mountaintop moments are just that. They're moments. They don't last forever. While you're up there, the real mission is to come down. And so while they were on the top of the mountain, Peter had this great idea. Peter said, Jesus, we might as well stay up here. Up here, we don't have to worry about the sick and the shut-in. Up in here, we don't got to worry about feeding 5,000. Up in here, we don't got to worry about children following us. Up in here, we don't have cell phone service. There are no calls. There are no emails. Peter said, Jesus, we might as well stay up here. Doc, Rabbi, it's good to be here. It's good for us to stay up here. And Peter was suggesting to Jesus that they park their cars on a mountaintop. Everything around us, everything that's around us tells us that we need to climb up. We need to climb up the corporate ladder. We need to climb up and make it out the hood. That we ought to pick ourselves up from our own bootstraps. Everything around us tells us to get rich or die trying. Everybody is trying to get up and go up and make it up, that they don't care who they have to step on in order to get there. But Jesus is not impressed by your climb up. Jesus is more concerned with your walk down. You climbed up the corporate ladder, but can you mentor the next generation? I know that you had to struggle, but can you stand to use your story in order to shape the future? I know you climbed up by your own bootstraps and you clawed your way up. You worked your way up to the top. But are you willing to come back down in order to help us build the future? We must never become satisfied with being the first black person in our position. It is not a compliment, all right, that you are the only black person in your office. That is not a compliment. You must make sure that you are not the first and the last. You must make sure that you are not the only one and the one and only. You've got to make sure that you are fighting to make room for others who are coming behind you. There is this temptation to use the mountaintop, especially in our hood. It's a temptation to use the mountaintop as our bragging right. There are so many people who use who they don't talk to anymore as their measuring stick for success. Everybody got that one family member who acts funny. I hope that's not you. That one cousin who doesn't call you back. That one cousin who got her first 6-figure job and all she does is wear red bottoms and she don't come to the family reunions no more because she made it. And she uses who she doesn't talk to anymore to measure how far she has made it. The mountaintop is not for bragging. It's only for vision. Jesus took his closest disciples up to the mountain just for a moment, so that they could see what others could not see. He was giving them a heads up that he was getting ready to die. He was getting ready to be crucified. He wanted to make sure that his disciples were in a place that they could continue the work following him. Climbing up the mountain is easy, but the question is, are you willing to come back down? The mountaintop is a pit stop, but it has never been designed to be your destination. The night before Dr. King died, he said, I may not get there with you, but I've been to the mountaintop. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter to me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over and I see the promised land. I know that longevity has its place, but that's not up to me now. I've been. He said, I have been. That means that it was past tense. He had been to the mountaintop, but he did not stay there. The mountaintop is not a destination. It is only a pit stop. God allows you to go up. God allows you to sit places that you never dreamed of. God allows you to go places that your grandparents never ever even imagined. But it wasn't to use that against other people. It was designed that you might go up to come back down. It was Deaconess Dorothy Davidson in Mount Carmel Baptist Church. She said, Lord, never, please help me, God. She says, never allow me to look down on anyone unless I'm trying to pull them up. The mountaintop is not your bragging right, but to whom much is given, much is demanded. Peter wanted to stay on the top of the mountain, and Peter wanted to build monuments to Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. Jesus said, He said, I'm not even dead yet, and you're trying to build a monument to me. It was Vincent Harding who said, it's easier to build monuments than to build a better world. Peter was so willing to build an altar, a statue, a memorial, a museum on the mountain to Moses and Elijah rather than come back down to the foot of the mountain. Beloved, we should celebrate our past. We should celebrate our ancestors. We should read and learn as much as we can about them. But we should never, ever park in our past. Don't be satisfied just knowing history. That is not enough. I don't just want to know what God did with Moses and Elijah. I want God to use me. I don't just want to know what God did with Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker. I want God to use me, a charge to keep. I have a God to glorify, a never dying soul to save and to fit it for the sky. You have your own responsibility. You have your own charge. You have your own call to serve your present age. And on the way back down from that mountain, Peter and James and John, they're arguing amongst each other. They're trying to say, Doc, now tell me, when the dead rise again, who's going to rise first? Elijah or Moses? They having these petty arguments amongst themselves. But the Bible tells us that when the mountaintop retreat was over, there was a man, a father, standing at the foot of the mountain with his sick son. His son had suffered from seizures. His son kept falling into fires and rivers. His son couldn't get himself together. He had epilepsy, and his son was believed to have a spirit. And his father comes to the disciples and says, I'm bringing my son to your disciples because I want to know, can they heal my son? Jesus had given the disciples power to cast out demons, power to teach and to heal. And this father brings his sick son to the disciples, but the disciples cannot heal because they're so focused on arguing over history than serving their present age. And the question this morning is not about how much history you know, but the question is, are you prepared to deal with our present realities in order for us to build a future? What good is it for us to argue up in here about the carpet and who's going to rise first, Moses or Elijah, when there's a child at the door of the church who's suffering and throws himself into fires and rivers? And I brought my son to your church, and the disciples could not heal because they were so focused on arguing over the past. What are we to do in this moment? Jesus says to the disciples, and I'm done after this on this Communion Sunday, Jesus says to the disciples, you could have done the same thing that I did. Jesus took the son, healed him, cast out the demon. Jesus says to the disciples, he says, you could have done just what I had done. Just what I did, you could have done. All you needed was faith. I'm here, I'm preaching right here. All you need is faith. And could it be, I'm not going to preach long, could it be that they were so focused on honoring Moses and Elijah that they forgot that they had the same power living inside of them? Could it be that they were so focused, they were looking for the next Martin Luther King? They were looking for the next Malcolm X, looking for the next whoever from whatever. They're looking for the next Harriet Tubman. And Jesus is trying to tell them that the same God who used them is the same God who's trying to use you. I'm done because we coming to the communion table, but they got 3 points. I got 3 points. Don't say that I didn't preach this morning. I got 3 points. This is a Sankofa moment. When I was growing up in church, I always used to see that Sankofa bird. That bird looking to the past with the egg in its mouth. You ought to look at that bird again. It's on your screen. But that bird symbolizes the relationship between the past, the present, and the future. You see that bird in front of your screen? The bird is looking to the past because that's where the wisdom is. That's where the knowledge is, the past. But now you also see that the bird has a egg in its mouth. You see that? That symbolizes the future. But that bird understands that in order to move forward, it has to look to the past for wisdom, but it has to move forward. Life is understood looking back, but it is only lived moving forward. 3 things that we learn from this passage, and then I'm done. In order for us to reclaim our history, but also to build our future, the first thing is empower. Jesus took time to empower his disciples to carry on the ministry without him. Look at somebody, chat, put that word in. Our goal this month is not just to celebrate the past, but it is to empower each other in this moment. Jesus knew that he would not be around forever. So he took his core disciples up to the mountain in order to mentor and to teach them so that they would carry on the legacy after his death. And in order to imagine a future, you must be willing to pour yourself out as a drink offering. We go to the funerals and we say, I am ready to be poured out as a drink offering. My time of my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight. I finished my course. I kept the faith. Paul was writing that to Timothy because Paul spent his entire ministry pouring into his young student Timothy. Elijah, the prophet, poured into Elisha. Jesus poured into the disciples. And on this Black History Sunday, as we come to the communion table, my question to you is, who are you pouring into today? Think about those who poured into you. I'm preaching right at you this morning in that living room. You ought to call their names. We talk about Black history. We talk about Martin King. We talk about Medgar Evers. We talk about Rosa Parks. But who poured into you? You ought to say their names right in your living room. You ought to chat somebody's name right in that box. Call the name of somebody who poured into you. You could say this morning, if it had not been for them, I don't know where I would be. It could be your grandmother. It could be your mother. It could be mother at the church. It could be uncle across the street. Somebody prayed for me. Had me on their mind, took the time to pray for me. Who poured into you? But as you come to this communion table, as you go into your refrigerator and get that grape juice in a few minutes, I want you to look at that cup and remember that you are also called to pour. You are also being called to pour into somebody else as somebody poured into you. That's what a tradition is. You got to empower someone as they empowered you. But secondly, we have a responsibility to reclaim. That young brother who had those seizures, he used to fall into fires and rivers. And as much as we want to celebrate the past, we got to look at our reality today and think about those who we are losing to the fires and the rivers of this world. Our brothers and sisters who we are losing to the prison system. Our children who are falling behind day in and day out during this online learning experience. We're losing people. And that's why I keep telling you, keep talking to our children, keep looking after our seniors. If you don't hear somebody's voice on the prayer line, call a deacon up and say, I haven't heard from Sister Sulu. We want to make sure that we reclaim everybody, that we lose no one. Your church family may be the only family that they have. You got a responsibility to reclaim not just history, but we are called to reclaim people. But thirdly, because my time is winding up, empower, reclaim. But the last thing is to teach the next generation the faith. Teach the next generation the faith. Grandma, grandpa, I want you to know something. A part of being a 30-year-old pastor is that I sit smack dab in the middle. Old soul growing up in Brooklyn, old Baptist church. But 30 years old means I'm not that far away from your 15-year-old. And I will tell you one secret. Just because you sing the song in the house does not mean that your child gets it. Just because you put on the white dress does not mean that they understand what's going on. Just because you listen to this sermon and they in the back room sleeping does not mean that they're just getting it by osmosis. We've got to be intentional about reaching out and building relationships with our children because, and I'm done here, this is the problem in the text. Peter wanted to stay on the top of the mountain. But what the Bible tells us later on in that verse was that they were not called to stay at the top of the mountain. They were actually called to move the mountain. I thought I just said something. They thought that they were supposed to stay at the top of the mountain. But the Lord said, if you had the faith, you could actually move the mountain. And the question that I have for you this morning is, I know that we celebrate our past, but do you believe that you still have the power through the word of God, through Jesus Christ, to move mountains? If you have the faith, the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move. But this kind only comes out through prayer and fasting. Oh, for a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by many a foe, that will not tremble on the brink of any earthly woe. You've got power inside of you to move a mountain. I don't want you to sleep on it. I don't want you to sleep on your gift. I don't want you to be lost into history that you forget about your future. But as I close, because I'm really closing now, one story from Black history, you ought to think about this. One night, Frederick Douglass was giving a speech in Boston, Massachusetts, to a crowded public meeting space right there in Massachusetts. And Douglass was giving this speech about the horrors of slavery and lynchings of abuse. And in the middle of that speech, after he gave that speech, he sat down. The whole room was quiet, arrested by this speech that he gave. And when he sat down, after he told all of the horrors of slavery, sitting right next to him was a woman by the name of Sojourner Truth. And after he gave this report of all of this bad news, Sojourner Truth asked Frederick Douglass that night, loud enough for everybody to hear. She said, "Frederick, is God dead? Is God dead?" And that was her way of reminding Frederick Douglass that God is still in the blessing business. It was her way of reminding Frederick Douglass that God was still on the throne. It was her way of reminding Douglass that God was still on the move, that God moved before, but also that God could move again. And I want somebody on this first Sunday of Black History, and dare I say Black History and Future Month, to know that history has not had its finest hour. The greatest preacher has not preached. The best teacher has not taught. The greatest student has not yet studied. The best choir has not sung. The tallest building has not been built. The greatest generation has not been born. As great as the past may be, it is behind us. As great as history may be to all of us, it is behind us, but our future is ahead of us. So we take our hats off to the past. We honor our ancestors. We lift them up. We bless their names. We take our hats off to the past, but we take our coats off to the future, because God is still doing great things, and God needs you. Yes, you. At 17, at 40, at 50, at 25, God needs you in order to move mountains. And if you don't have the faith, the mountain won't be moved. So the question this morning is, how long till Black Future Month? We celebrate our history, but we come down the mountain. We come all the way down the mountain because we still got work to do through Jesus Christ our Lord.